Welcome to When Gen X Ruled the Multiplex, in which I look at some of the films that were important to those of us who were born in the general range of 1965 to 1980. Today I'm looking at Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, which was directed by Stephen Herek, then known for the 1986 comedy horror film Critters, and was written by the team of Chris Matheson and Ed Solomon. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure was filmed in early 1987, but the production company went bankrupt, and the finished film was shelved until it found a new distributor. When it finally hit theaters, it became the sleeper hit of 1989. Breakaway by Big Pig plays over the opening credits, in which we find ourselves in the utopian world of San Dimas, California in 2688. We meet a groovy time traveler named Rufus, who is played by legendary stand-up comedian George Carlin. In San Dimas in 1988, high school students Bill S. Preston Esquire and Ted Theodore Logan are practicing in the garage for their band Wild Stallions. That's Wild Stallions with two Y's, naturally. They are not any good at all, but boy are they enthusiastic. Bill is played by Alex Winter, whom we've already seen in The Lost Boys. Ted is played by Keanu Reeves, who... My god, I can't believe I've done 65 of these episodes so far, and this is the first Keanu Reeves film I've covered. Though maybe that's not so much of a surprise. Before becoming one of the most well-known film stars of the 90s, Reeves had relatively few notable screen credits in the 80s, apart from his breakthrough role in the dark 1986 drama River's Edge, and his supporting part in the 1989 comedy Parenthood, and of course his attention-grabbing performance here as Ted Theodore Logan. At school, Bill and Ted's history teacher, Mr. Ryan, played by former NFL great Bernie Casey, is disgusted by their lack of knowledge of historical figures. Their final oral presentation is scheduled for the next day, and Mr. Ryan tells them they will flunk his class unless they manage to knock his socks off. Bill's young and pretty stepmom, Missy, who was a senior at their school when Bill and Ted were freshmen, gives the boys a ride home. Missy is played by Amy Stock. At home, Ted has an acrimonious encounter with his hard-nosed policeman father, played by Hal Landon Jr., who threatens to send Ted to military school if he flunks history. In the San Dimas of 2688, Rufus meets with the three most important people in the world, a panel of powerful global leaders who are all played by extremely cool icons of 80s music. Clarence Clemens, the saxophonist for Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band, Martha Davis, lead singer of the Motels, known for Suddenly Last Summer and Only the Lonely, and Fee Waybill, lead singer of The Tubes, known for She's a Beauty. As Father Time by Shark Island plays, the three most important people in the world tell Rufus they're sending him back in time to help Bill and Ted pass their history final. Rufus's time machine is a phone booth. In the original script, the time machine was a van. In fact, the screenplay's original title was Bill and Ted's Time Van. After the release of Back to the Future, which of course featured a time-traveling DeLorean, the screenwriters decided a phone booth would be more original. Matheson and Solomon have sworn in interviews that similarities to Doctor Who's time-traveling police call box were entirely coincidental. Bill and Ted do their best to study in Bill's bedroom while Dangerous by Shark Island plays. Missy brings them snacks, and then Bill's dad kicks Bill and Ted out of the house so he can canoodle with Missy on his son's bed. The boys head to the local Circle K to sit on the curb and ask historical questions of random passersby. The sky clouds over, and Rufus's phone booth arrives in a burst of electricity. Rufus tells Bill and Ted the future of San Dimas hinges upon them passing their history report, so Ted won't get sent to military school, and the music of Wild Stallions will bring about world peace. He's going to help them by sending them on an adventure through time. A second phone booth materializes, and time-traveling versions of Bill and Ted from slightly in the future arrive. They greet themselves and assure them they're going to have a most excellent adventure in history. To demonstrate how the time machine works, Rufus invites Bill and Ted to join him in the phone booth, and they zoom through time and space. They end up in 1805 Austria, at the moment of invasion by Napoleon's army. They take off in a rush when Napoleon orders an attack, but somehow Napoleon, who is played by Terry Camilleri, gets sucked along in their time stream. When the booth arrives at Ted's house in 1988, Napoleon is there as well. After Rufus leaves them to their own devices, Bill decides they should collect a bunch of historical figures for their report. They leave Napoleon, who is impossibly arrogant and temperamental, in the care of Ted's younger brother, Deacon, who is played by Fraser Bain. So Bill and Ted head into the past in search of famous figures. In New Mexico in 1879, they hit a saloon where they meet Billy the Kid, played by Dan Shore, who turns out to be down for pretty much anything. In Athens in 410 BCE, Bill and Ted impress Socrates, played by Tony Steedman, by quoting deeply philosophical lyrics from the 1977 Kansas hit Dust in the Wind, then lure him into the phone booth. Next stop, England in the 15th century, where Bill and Ted meet and fall deeply in love with a pair of medieval princesses. Princess Elizabeth, played by Kimberly Cates, and Princess Joanna, played by Diane Franklin, who appeared in the 80s teen classics Better Off Dead and The Last American Virgin. Shenanigans ensue, and long story short, Bill and Ted end up slated for execution by order of the king. They're saved by Billy the Kid and Socrates, and the whole gang makes a wild escape. The time machine is damaged in the process, and they end up hurtling into the far-flung future. There they meet the three most important people in the world, who hail Bill and Ted as icons, as In Time by Robbie Robb plays. Called upon to make a speech, Bill tells the three most important people in the world to be excellent to each other, and Ted counsels them to party on, dude. Bill and Ted then re-enter the phone booth with their traveling companions and continue on their journey. Back in 1988, Deacon takes Napoleon to an ice cream parlor, and I have to say, the props department on this film managed to create the most outstanding ice cream sundae I have ever seen. I have spent a decent chunk of my life since 1988 chasing this platonic ideal of an ice cream sundae. The waiters at the ice cream parlor are played by screenwriters Ed Solomon and Chris Matheson in a quick cameo. Ed Solomon has gone on to write many other successful screenplays, including Men in Black and the 2000 Charlie's Angels reboot, while Chris Matheson is the son of legendary sci-fi author Richard Matheson, whose 1954 novel I Am Legend has been adapted into films 3 times thus far. 1964's The Last Man on Earth, 1971's The Omega Man, and 2007's I Am Legend. Deacon and his friends take Napoleon bowling, but Napoleon acts like an entitled jerk, and they ditch him. In 1901 Vienna, Bill and Ted grab Sigmund Freud, played by Rod Loomis, then head to Kassel, Germany in 1801, where they grab Beethoven, played by Clifford David. In 1429 France, they grab Joan of Arc, who is played by Jane Wiedlin, co-founder of the Go-Go's. In Outer Mongolia, 1209, Bill and Ted lure Genghis Khan into the increasingly crowded phone booth by dangling a Twinkie in front of him. Genghis Khan is played by Al Leong, whom we have seen playing villains in Die Hard and Big Trouble in Little China. Finally, they head to the White House in 1863 and kidnap Abraham Lincoln, who is played by Robert V. Barron. The phone booth, which was damaged back in medieval England, finally breaks down, and the whole gang ends up stranded 1,000,000 years in the past. Ted passes out a beloved 80s culinary treat, canned pudding, while Bill repairs the phone booth with chewing gum. They make it back to San Dimas, to the parking lot of the Circle K, where Bill and Ted briefly cross paths with their earlier selves, and then the whole gang heads to the mall. Bill and Ted leave the historical figures in the food court while they track down Napoleon. They try to figure out what the greatest general in history would do if he was stranded in San Dimas for one day, and deduce correctly that he'd go to the water park. They recapture a giddy Napoleon who is having the time of his life on the water slides. Meanwhile, back at the mall, in a montage set to Extreme's Play With Me, Joan of Arc commandeers an aerobics class, Beethoven jams out on the synths at the music store, Socrates and Billy the Kid try to pick up girls but are cock-blocked by a corndog-wielding Freud, and Genghis Khan goes hog-wild in a sporting goods store. They all get hauled down to the San Dimas Sheriff's Station, where they're booked by Ted's dad. Via a series of time-traveling shenanigans of increasing absurdity, Bill and Ted steal the keys to the jail from Ted's dad and rescue the historical figures. The whole gang gathers at the school just in time for Bill and Ted's report. They put on a big, splashy, high-energy stage performance in which each historical figure demonstrates his or her field of expertise. It culminates with a speech by Abraham Lincoln, which has everyone in the audience leaping to their feet and applauding. Sometime later, after all the historical figures have been returned to their proper time and place, the Wild Stallions rehearse in the garage. Rufus arrives with Princess Elizabeth and Princess Joanna in tow. He explains that the future has been saved. Wild Stallions' music will bring an end to war and poverty. Rufus presents Bill and Ted with new guitars, then jams with them, and with the princesses, who, as it turns out, are future members of Wild Stallions. Two Heads Are Better Than One by Power Tool takes us into the end credits. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure was followed by a sequel, 1991's Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. There was also a 1991 animated series, and a live-action TV series that lasted for 8 episodes in 1992. I have no memory of this series, but it looks so incredibly low-rent and cheesy that I feel I must hunt it down and watch all 8 episodes. There was also a Bill and Ted breakfast cereal. At the end of the decade, we were all swept up in Bill and Ted mania. In 1990, my high school's junior class play, which was co-written and co-directed by yours truly, featured Bill and Ted time-traveling through the 80s on a farewell tour of the decade. Then in 2020, a full 31 years after the release of the original, Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves reunited on screen for Bill and Ted Face the Music, which was written by original writing team Chris Matheson and Ed Solomon. Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure is probably the last great teen comedy of the 80s, and that seems right because probably the first great teen comedy of the 80s was 1982's Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which I looked at a few months ago. Those two films share some of the same DNA in their Southern California settings and their laid-back and unbothered approach to Gen X existence. Fast Times at Ridgemont High's Jeff Spicoli is surely a spiritual big brother to Bill S. Preston Esquire and Ted Theodore Logan, sharing the same easygoing demeanor and slang-heavy surfer drawl. This is a ridiculous, yet delightful film. Not every gag holds up, but overall it has such a cheerful, chaotic spirit that it's still a lot of fun to watch. Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves became instant friends when they met at their audition, and they've remained close through the decades. That shines through in their performances. Winter and Reeves have great chemistry together. All the actors are good. Apart from Al Leong and Jane Wiedlin, most of the actors who play the historical figures are best known for their roles in this film. That's not a bad position to be in, because every single performance manages to be likable and funny. On set, director Stephen Herek helped Winter and Reeves get into character by telling them to channel the spirit of Labrador retrievers, which obviously worked beautifully. Bill and Ted are charming, well-meaning goofballs. Unlike many teenagers depicted in 80s films, and unlike many of us Gen Xers, they aren't at all rebellious. They are sweet-natured people-pleasers who want to pass history class and want to have a good time. Like Labrador retrievers, they like everyone and want to be liked in return. That isn't a hardship because Bill and Ted are a pair of uniquely likable nitwits, and it is a pleasure tagging along with them on their most excellent adventure. Next time, I'm looking at Space Camp, that fluffy and harmless 1986 flick about teenagers on the space shuttle that had the ghastly timing of hitting theaters shortly after the Challenger explosion. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you here for that.